Thank you, Tim. Well, I've got a very simple job now. I'm delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, Philip Campbell, the Editor-in-Chief of Nature and Nature Publishing Group. And just before some words on what Philip's going to cover, a few words on his background. He was previously the Physical Sciences Editor of Nature, and then in 1988, the founding editor of Physics World. He's worked for the UK government, or with the UK government, the European Commission, and the US National Institutes of Health on issues relating to science and its impact on society. He's a founding trustee of the research funding charity MQ Transforming Mental Health, and I'm sure research funding will be an issue that comes up during the questions and answers. And Philip took his current role at Nature in 1995, where he's responsible for all editorial content and management, as well as assuming the long-term quality of all Nature publications. So, Philip, I think you're going to be talking about the role of openness in driving innovation and the balance between the government's support for data infrastructure and the ability of companies to harness that. So please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Philip Campbell.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I should acknowledge Taylor Wessing are our lawyers, and they helped us deal with a difficult libel case, which we won. But the difficulty of the libel case was reflected entirely in the state of the British libel laws as they were then and in fact still are. So I'm just going to acknowledge Taylor Wessing for that. They gave great support. I also want to just acknowledge the fact that Nature published, we are the most highly cited scientific journal in the world, and we did publish Dolly the Sheep. And I'm really sorry that I'm not going to be here for a bit of this breakout group entitled How the Rise in Diversity and the Death of Dolly, Dilbert, Distance and Dr. No Will Change the Shape of Work to Come. I don't know if the person who organised that session is here, but I'm really sorry that I'm going to miss that. So, I want to speak about the relationship between government-funded openness and innovation and businesses that depend on it and can build on it, stimulated by current developments in the public and private sectors in and beyond science. Let me put myself in a business perspective. I'm an editor, not a publisher, but I'm part of the scientific, technical and medical publishing sector that has a global market size of about $34 billion. Our publishing company, Macmillan Science and Education, occupies 1.1% of that market. Our brands include the Humanities and Social Sciences publisher Palgrave Macmillan, and Scientific American, and Nature. Right now you can see in many countries, but especially in the UK, how the roles of government policy, both in research funding and also in retrospective research assessment, converge in the direction of increasing societal value and impact. We all must continue to recognise how important fundamental research is in inspiring young scientists, in delivering a skilled workforce, and in generating often unpredictable business growth. But brilliant brains at any age can also be motivated to make a difference here and now to the world they live in. Indeed, the Vice President for Research at MIT told me recently how recent cohorts of intakes of undergraduates and indeed doctoral students really do show more evidence than they did in the past that they care about making a difference to today, as opposed to just academic prestige. So critical to all of this is the concept of impact. Tracing the scientific impact of a paper isn't difficult in following its citations, but quickly gets more difficult if you want to see how it relates to technology empowerment, as has notably happened with some Nature papers in relation to drug discovery and information and communications technologies. There are other softer types of impact too, which can be important and merit assessment. In Nature, for example, we publish weekly articles about the issues surrounding science, written by external authors. Although these are sometimes cited in the formal literature and written up in the press, the main impact is much less visible. After a delay of a few months, we ask our authors to feed back, and we get comments along the lines of, the article is now routinely included in background briefing packs by this or that academy or funder, or it has now become a significant foundation stone for a platform for agricultural development, or Before this appeared, the community had accepted the default approach, but now, at conferences, people routinely present two alternative paths, including the figures from our article. And finally, as another example, the article was very helpful in showing to this particular organisation that we should be joining up, not competing, and so on. So all very qualitative, but all highly motivating and important for our authors' reputations and our own, if we can make such impacts visible. So just such an exercise forms a part of the current Research Excellence Framework, which is a grinding bureaucratic exercise which nevertheless seeks to assess the outputs of departments of all the British universities. It's run by the Higher Education Funding Council of England. 7,000 societal impacts statements from universities were submitted as a requirement of that assessment exercise. The rankings of university departments will be published in December, and the statements themselves will be published, actually by us, in March next year. Look at some of those statements and you will see not only spin-off companies, for example, but also changes in healthcare practice for heart failure, as one example, both in the UK and internationally, educational physics software in schools based on CERN experiments, changes in music training. None of these, incidentally, could have been predicted in a grant application. So, as with the impacts of our Nature articles I mentioned previously, we need to find ways to make such impacts visible more routinely. This requires time and infrastructure, but that visibility and assessment will feed and inspire more such activity and new ideas that might lead to new companies. They will also deliver credit and even prestige to the researchers and entrepreneurs and funders or investors involved. They will also, incidentally, help address some of the great societal challenges of our time. So I now want to turn to how the availability of information spawns innovation and commerce. Let me list some companies. I may pronounce this wrong. Skizzle or Sizzle, S-C-I-Z-Z-L-E. Nowomics, Sparrow, PubChase, ReadCube, Mendeley, Faculty of 1000 Prime, Twitter, Google Scholar. These are all commercial companies that, among the various services they offer, do one particular thing. They help researchers by recommending to them new papers that are relevant, papers that have just appeared out there amongst the sea of papers. The oldest of these, Google Scholar, was launched just 10 years ago. One of those, ReadCube, is one of a number of small ventures owned or co-owned by a holding group of such companies called Digital Science. And that is also a part of our publisher, Macmillan Science and Education. And I'm going to mention three other ventures within digital science. Uber Research allows users to track the world's research grants across all the disciplines. Symplectic allows you to discover individual researchers' outputs. Altmetric exposes social media impacts of individual papers and articles, as well as providing a search function across the social media. All of these companies that I've mentioned have a common feature. They're all built on open information. They add intelligence value to the torrent of disorganized but freely available public information in and around research. Most of them started as pieces of innovation by individual academics before turning into spin-offs or being set up or bought by bigger players. There are many such activities starting up across science, technology and medicine. All of them hope to provide services that are seen to be so valuable that researchers or their institutions or their stakeholders, including many in this room, will pay for the service. So here are three pieces of advice to publishers and less traditional businesses from a recent analysis of the science, technology and medicine information markets by the analysis firm Outsell. Innovation is the name of the game. Nurture it and watch it grow. This is all quoted. Given the number of startups launched in the past few years, it is clear that opportunity exists, and as new capabilities and functions emerge, so will new opportunities. Keeping an eye on competitors' offerings and how they are accepted or rejected by end users, keeping in touch with the market and listening to end users' needs, finding pain points, of which there are many, believe me, in professional workflows, all feed into innovation process. Another headline, act on opportunities around big data. You're going to be discussing this later on. The exploitation of large collections of information has only just begun. This means opportunity in what could be called the wild, wild west of big data. Standards, rights management, mining tools, and integration into workflow are all under development, and those players currently diving into this market segment are most likely the first movers who will determine how product development and monetization plays out. Now is the time to look into the future and imagine possible uses, technical management, and mining of big data sets, as those imaginings are tomorrow's products. And I'll just add that the NIH, the National Institutes of Health in the US, have just announced grants of $32 million just to make big data sets available. And that's part of a $600 million effort in that direction over the next few years. And then the final urging in this report by Outsell: treat open as an opportunity. Open is here to stay. Sharing, collaborating, and communicating are embedded in the research community. Governments recognize the value of this open environment and are mandating its existence, even connecting it to receiving funding, as in the UK. Those who treat open as an opportunity are reaping the benefits of this mindset, finding that building it into their product development plans is a successful strategy. While many have embraced this concept, those who have not are well advised to think twice about dismissing it as a way to drive growth. So that's the end of the quote. Open is here to stay, they say. Brave words. I agree with those words, but you need to look at constraints beneath the surface before getting into this market, getting too gung-ho with your excitement. So last year, I served on a Royal Society working group that produced a report, Science as a Public Enterprise, it was called, focusing on open data. Of course, we realised that commercial interests and rights to privacy are two appropriate constraints on the openness of data. But I was pleased to ensure that the report should also document the financial costs of databases. If government policymakers and researchers are to extol the cause of open data, they need to be honest about the costs. So, consider two free access databases. The Worldwide Protein Data Bank is the single repository of protein structures, a key element of biological understanding and biological application. Now, we did this report about a year ago, and we were using slightly older data, but as of January 2012, it held over 80,000 structures. It's now much more. In 2011, an average of 32 million data files were downloaded every month. The total costs were $11 million per year, with 69 full-time equivalent staff, and a 6 to 7 million estimated cost just in inputting the data and curating it. Now take another academic database, Archive. This is a database that simply hosts raw manuscripts or preprints by researchers. As of January 2012, it contains 750,000 articles, was staffed by 6 people, running at a total cost of around $820,000 a year. This database is a mainstay of communication between many in the physical sciences. So both of these key resources are wholly funded by philanthropy and mainly the US government, even though they're global facilities that everybody uses, and they're not in a top-level government grant, but are by discretionary contributions from the various agencies that value them. I should also mention PubMed, another US government-funded resource, a key resource indeed for the biology and biomedical research communities and for companies that depend on them. It allows its users to find the abstracts of the world's biomedical and clinical research literature. Its costs are difficult to see within the NIH budgets, but including the continuing development of standards, they must run to about tens of millions of dollars every year. It would have been great to have just that sort of a service, that navigation visibility service for the scientific literature, also for physical and environmental sciences and engineering. But the US Congress vetoed such an initiative thanks to short-sighted, in my view, lobbying by data businesses. No commercial equivalent has started up, therefore. It's a classic case of a market failure to provide access that is considered foundational in the life sciences, and of a gap that, in my view, government should fill. Because the outcomes of science are seen to have economic value, whether in a skilled workforce or in new companies and technologies, science is funded by every major country as a high priority. China's decades-long dedication to science funding is now paying off, within science at least, as its share of scientific outputs exceeds that of the US, or is drawing close to the US in quantity, and increasingly delivers top quality too. At a time of massive economic turbulence, the science budgets have been largely protected around the world, and certainly here in the UK. And what with economic growth in Asia, government funding in science worldwide is slowly increasing, and corporate funding is also expected to increase. Given this, and also innovation in added valued services, analysts predict a growth rate of the STM information and publishing market of about 3 to 4% per year over the next few years. But as things stand, not enough of that growth will be devoted to funding the costs of openness in foundational information. So since this is a meeting about UK and innovation, I'll mention here the Catapult Centre for the Connected Digital Economy. As a concerned citizen worried about the future of healthcare under the new NHS commissioning system, I'm delighted to see this Catapult helping to add value to the information within the NHS about just who is providing what services. As a champion of openness-driven added value, I'm delighted also to see its project with Greater Manchester in sharing public services data, a project shared with the Catapult for Future Cities. As one small example of what could develop, the latter Catapult's website celebrates how university students created an app based on a public database of every street lamp in Manchester that allows joggers to compete in visiting or claiming every street lamp they visit and thereby keep track of their activities and calories. Maybe they can commercialize it on the back of government campaigns to reduce obesity and health costs. And to take another example that our own publications can supply, the Catapult in Cell Therapy. This is using openness to make available information about current research grants for preclinical and clinical research projects. How much more powerful would those efforts be if the research papers and the research data were also publicly freely available in their published form at the moment of publication? Despite the best intentions of the recent Science Minister David Willetts, and despite many reports highlighting the benefits of open research, governments in other countries, and possibly in the UK, cannot or will not find the money to pay the costs that such openness inevitably requires, even though those costs are small compared to the total cost of research. So the outsell analysis shows that this gold open access, which is what the jargon is growing, but is slowly growing and is still less than 10% of the total research output from the research community worldwide. As an ex-researcher myself, and as an enthusiast for the societal and commercial development I have discussed here, I support gold open access. This is even though, as someone who needs to have his salary paid, I have concerns about the reluctance of funders to pay for the true costs of dissemination and added value that everyone takes for granted. But in the long run, and for the greater good, especially in addressing urgent needs such as countering infectious diseases and climate impacts, the dissemination of a research project's outputs should be seen, in my view, as a part of the necessary expenditure and free access that is sure to maximize the social value and opportunities for new innovation and commerce. So, we all need to be mindful of things we take for granted, especially information infrastructures wholly dependent on government funding that in fact need to grow. And if you are a funder of research, whether in government or business, please add a percentage for the purposes not of an unusable data dump, but for mindful dissemination. And please also ensure that the impacts of that are reported back to you and not just buried in your archives, but displayed for all to see in a way that will further drive such beneficial social and commercial behaviours of the sort that I've tried to celebrate here. Thanks for your attention.